thing I've noticed, and I still notice, is they want to do things with me and my wife more than I ever wanted to do things with my parents, even at that age.
Hello and welcome to the Dad Dialogue Podcast, the show where we talk about the successes and the stresses of becoming a dad and being a dad. My name is Lawrence. Thank you so much for being with us today. Before I introduce today's guest, a quick reminder, you can go over to daddialogue.co.uk if you'd like to learn more about the show or get in touch to be a guest on a future episode. So joining me today is Clay. Clay is from the US. He is the father to 2 kids. And in our episode, we talk a little bit about the age gap between his 2 kids, of being 2 years, what it looked like welcoming the second child into his life, into the family, and what kind of looked like, and some of the challenges that might have come along with that. And Clay also shares about his story of being made redundant, losing his job during the COVID times, and the impact that had on his family, and also his approach to life, and how he has been able to learn from that and see the silver lining in losing his job, and how he's then been able to grow out of that and approach to life, and these pillars of how he approaches life. Really interesting conversation, and I hope you enjoy. So let's get into the conversation. Clay, thank you so much for joining us here on the Dad Dialogue Podcast. Can you just start off by telling our listeners just a little bit about yourself and your family?
Sure. I live in Texas. I've been married for almost 15 years. I have a 12-year-old son and a 10-year-old daughter, and we live on what can best be described as a farm, really. We have a couple dogs, lots of cats. We have chicken. We have several horses, a couple of mules. And so like I said, it's a nice, almost 5-acre plot of land. It didn't start out with the intention of being a farm, but it's kind of grown into that. And
so at 12 years old and 10 years old, with all those animals around, do you employ the kids, so to speak, get them earning some pocket money by helping out with looking after the animals? Do you find that useful?
No, they deal with the cats, but and the dogs a little bit. We thought they'd enjoy the horses a little more than they do. They like to show them off when people come over, but they don't really deal too much with them.
The dirty work. You can't get them elbow deep in the dirty work yet.
No. And they like to pick out things for my wife to put in the garden, but they don't like to get too dirty with it. But.
Interesting. Are you hoping that changes? Are you kind of like hoping that they can kind of chip in a little bit more?
Oh yeah. Well, we're just hoping we can get them outside a little more. So that would be nice if they would chip in just for that reason, if nothing else. My son in particular, he's into video games and all that. And so we have to bribe him to come outside sometimes. My daughter's a little more willing to get dirty and play and that kind of stuff. So,
were you yourself into video games?
Oh yeah. But I kind of did both. I liked it outside too. I grew up, my grandfather had a bunch of land, had cattle and all that sort of stuff. And so I grew up with my dad going out there and on the tractor and all that kind of stuff. And so he would do that, and I would wander around just in the open fields and, creeks and things like that, and find sticks and, make stuff up. And then also, like I said, there was a side with the video games, and, there was a lot of times where me and some friends would, we would walk to the local video store and pick up a video game and go play it for the afternoon or whatever. So it was a little more balanced with me than it seems to be with the kids.
Yeah. I ask that because it's an interesting reflection point for me, because my 2 kids are currently 4 and 2. They're both boys. So they're a little bit, a few years away from kind of getting into it properly. And I just often think, well, I have these conversations with other dads and even with other men who maybe are not yet fathers about kind of video games, and just kind of appreciating, like, some people take a really hard line of just like, video games equal negativity. And I think that's obviously just quite a dangerous line to draw, because it just doesn't really kind of honor what they can offer children and what they want to be getting involved with. So I think it's a really delicate balance. It sounds, quite a bit different, when you or I were growing up, and it was a little bit more challenging to kind of get our hands on it. Whereas now, with the way in the world, the way in which video games kind of transfers onto mobile phones and things like that, it's a whole other discussion point. But it's something that I think is super important, at least as fathers, to kind of really think about and reflect on our own journeys and how things might have looked different in a different generation.
That's one of the things me and my wife have talked about, is that, that's where his friends are too. They interact that way in a way that when I was young, I would walk. Me and my friends would walk to each other's houses or ride bikes, and eventually we got old enough and drove. But we lived close together in a smaller town than I live in, and we actually drive 10 or 15 minutes to take our kids to school in a different town. So these kids that are their friends don't live in the same town. And so they can't walk and see each other. And I don't know if they would, even if they could with this generation, but, so playing online is a way they can interact with their friends. And then when their friends come over here, they play outside most of the time. And so when given the opportunity, at least, with my son, he'll want to play outside and his friends want to play outside. They just don't have as much access to each other, I guess, as I did with my friends growing up. And I try to keep that in mind. And, we're not, he's not me and we're not growing up in the 80s. That's the conversation I keep having with myself, is how to balance that.
Yeah, no, it's super important. Yeah, I think that's a good reflection point. And I'd encourage any father kind of listening along that is just the reflection to have is you kind of come up with your own opinions based on your own experiences and doesn't necessarily translate, do things look different or do things look kind of similar? So I did want to kind of just talk a little bit about, as you have a similar age gap to the kids that I have, who are a bit older, what's the kind of biggest challenges that you found of having an age gap of just 2 years? Have you found that it's always been the same sort of challenges coming up, or have you found that they've been different challenges over the years?
There hasn't really been a lot, because they're really good. They fight a lot, but they're really good friends. And so like
classic phrase.
Yes.
They're really good friends, but they're always fighting. But
the gap between for my sister and me was 5 years, and my younger brother's 12 years, and so I almost didn't grow up with them. And so I'm just now becoming like real good friends with my brother, but they've been friends since they were young, and like I said, they fight like people talk about brothers fighting. They fight like brothers and sisters. We played a game last night. And me and my son won, and my daughter was very upset, and and then he was mocking her a little bit, and just kind of fun.
So winner.
Yes. And so there hadn't been a lot of challenges because of the different, or the closeness of the age. We're a little more worried when they get older if that'll cause some challenge, because their friends will be of similar ages, and so they might interact in high school situations. Like I said, me and my sister were never in the same school at the same time. And so there was no crossover with friends and things like that. But we're worried that might cause some issues, when they get to be 14 to 18. But so far, there's not been really any major, like I said, they like, my daughter will play, my son sort of dictates what they do. And because he's the most obstinate. And so she'll play video games with him and watch movies with him and things like that. And there's not really, other than that, like I said, there's no real challenge we've come up with yet, but that sticks out.
So would you say like early on, did you say the transition from 1 to 2 children was kind of quite straightforward in that sense? Because you're obviously fairly far away from that, point. But when I have kids that are 4 and 2, I actually get the question quite a lot from parents that maybe have one kid that's the same age as my younger one. So if they've got one kid that's like 2 years old, all they're thinking about is, how do you manage with 2? Like, what if this happens? What if this happens? Like, you have a toddler and a baby. How does that happen? Do you remember those days at all, or are they just like a distant memory?
No, it was funny because our son was, he was a challenge. He insisted on sleeping in the bed with us almost right up until the point that our daughter was born. There were a couple nights where he stayed up for hours just crying, and we thought, "Oh my gosh, what are we going to do?" He's never going to go to sleep, and all those things. He was very, very challenging. And our daughter was just so much easier that anything we were worried about just sort of went away, because it was like, "Oh my gosh, she'll sleep through the night. She can sleep in her own crib." And and I was going to school a lot, kind of when my son was just sort of getting into his own bed and that sort of thing. My wife will tell me horror stories that she sort of shielded me from about him, hitting her and all this sort of stuff. And so just not having to deal with that with our daughter was such a big change that it was, that was sort of the overarching feeling. I'm trying to think if we were really that nervous about it. I don't think we were, like I said, just because it was such a challenge with our son. And, we sort of, we didn't know what either, what the sex of either kid was going to be when they were born. And so everyone else was sort of like, how can y'all do this without, what color are you going to paint the nursery? And so we were sort of embracing the challenge of it all, a little bit.
That's a really good way to approach things. I think when people ask me that question, I don't think it comes out of a place of just like, I think it often comes from a place of, my current child is really challenging. He never sleeps. He screams all the time. Yes. Like, is my second one going to be the same or are they going to be different? And they're looking for other parents to answer that question for them for some reason. But that's quite a nice approach, I think. It's just like, hey, like this is what it is. We can just go again and roll the dice and maybe it'll be a challenge or maybe it won't.
And we were, like I said, we were a little older when we had kids, certainly compared to to people around here and my family and all that. And so we were just sort of thankful that we had kids,
Exactly.
And so that was a challenge, in and of itself. And so, but yeah, I know that that second child can be a little scary for some people.
I think you're kind of touching on a subject that I've dived into it with some other, I was about to say contestants. I mean, guests. Spoken about with some other guests before, the difficulties of, it's not always straightforward. And, sometimes you weigh around or you don't weigh around and you just never do know. So like they truly are a blessing to like look at these little kids that are entrusted to us. So, I think appreciating the challenge and just kind of going head first and the fact that you can kind of look back on it without really looking at those challenges, I think is a really encouraging thing for parents maybe that only have one child right now and are maybe concerned about it, but wanting that second one. I think that's a really nice little story to hang your hat on, so to speak. So I appreciate hearing from that. I understand you had a fairly eventful period during the time of COVID. I suppose we all did have an eventful time during COVID. A lot of us have tried to forget about it and move on. But you did mention a little bit to me. So can you just tell us a little bit about that and what came out of that season of life?
Sure. Look, I'm a graphic designer by trade. And so I'd been working in marketing departments, basically my entire career at that point had been 15, 16 years. Right. I'd worked essentially, I'd stepped up, the right sort of a path, people sort of imagine. And I was in like a fairly successful company. It was a large company that spread over 4 states, it was, and I worked at the corporate office in marketing and it was right as COVID, it was right before COVID sort of exploded in the United States. And so this is, I think, early March. And I get called into my HR director's office and, it gives you the short spiel that says, we had a bad quarter, basically. We're having to make cuts. And, you'll be the first of a few that are going to get cut. And so I got laid off. And like I said, COVID hadn't exploded, so it wasn't like, it didn't make any sense yet. And so I went home and the first thing my wife said was, oh, you need to go to the local unemployment office and file for unemployment. And so that's what I did. And I remember distinctly the lady, after I'd done the process and filled it all out and everything, she said, now it could take up to 2 weeks, maybe a month, one or the other, but to get your first check from unemployment. I remember laughing and telling her, I'll have a job by then. And I think, the flashpoint in the United States was kind of Tom Hanks going into isolation and then the NBA season ending. And so those both happened the next week. And so suddenly no one needed a graphic designer because the first thing to go is marketing when any business is struggling. So I could not find a job And then, like this, things just started progressing, and obviously, the shutdown and all of that. And so at that point, it was clear, like, not only was I not getting a job, like nobody's getting a job, I'm stuck here. And I sort of knew in the moment that, like, this is a going forward, it could be different. Like, this is a time I can embrace this. And, I'm not going to, I'm going to apply for jobs occasionally, but I'm not going to expect to get these, and I'm going to be here, and I'm going to have to, for the first time, I didn't have anything to do, since I was, 18 years old or whatever. And in college, I had nobody dictating what I needed to do next. I was like, I'm going to have to make my own schedule up.
Yeah.
And I'm going to have to find something meaningful to do every day. And so I started doing things that I started thinking, like, what did I used to do? Or I didn't know what I liked to do, if that makes sense. Like,
Yeah.
I didn't have hobbies. I didn't, I worked and came home and just did normal stuff. Watched TV, ate dinner, hung out with kids. So it's like from 9 to 5, I have to find something to do. And so I started just doing things. That's when I started playing. I hadn't played video games really in years, but my brother still played them a lot. And so I started playing video games with my brother and realized how much fun I used to have as a kid playing video games. And that was the age my son was really starting to get into some of these online games like Roblox and Minecraft and those sorts of things. And so I started playing those with him. My father had just recently retired, and he was doing a lot of woodwork. And so I started going to my dad's shop and doing woodwork with him and things like that, and realized how much I like doing those things. And, me and my wife obviously spent more time together, and it was just like, for a lot of people, it seemed to almost be the worst 8 months, 12 months of their life. And for me, it was one of the best 12 months of my life. Yeah. And so, coming out of that, it took me about 18 months to get a job, but I knew, like, when I insisted on it being a hybrid position, the job I eventually got was not a hybrid role, but I told them, I said, I'm not going to come in. I'll come in half a day, basically is what I did. I came in the morning and left about lunch. So I was like, cause I've got this whole life built around me being available and, for my family. They were happy to make those accommodations, and it was, I could pick my kids up from school if my wife couldn't do it. I could take them to doctor's appointments. I could be there when they got home from school, and they, didn't have to wait an hour and a half to tell me about their day. I could get whatever they were excited about. I could get it in the moment. It made clear what was important to me in a way I had never been forced to think about before, is really what it did.
That's super interesting. And I think that's, again, kind of like taking a challenge of, being let go of unemployment and really kind of turning it around for your benefit and finding the positives in it. And I guess finding the silver lining within the dark clouds. There's a few things I'm curious to find out more about. So when you're sat down in that HR office and they tell you, like, you're one of the first names that we're going to unfortunately going to lay off, at that point, how long is it a case of you pack your bags and you're out the door, or are you given some amount of notice in terms of how much pay you get?
There was no real, there was no real direction, like, you'd be out. But I stayed for maybe a couple of hours, because I was like, and it's just how I think. I'm like, they're going to hire someone after me, and if they come into a mess, it's not going to benefit anyone. And so I actually stayed for a couple hours and did some stuff and to make the transition to whoever came in after me easier. And eventually they were like, we appreciate it, but you need to go. And so I was actually there, like I said, a couple hours afterwards, just making sure the transition was smooth. And because I just thought none of these people were like, I didn't get fired. They weren't like, get out, you were doing a bad job. It was just, and so I didn't feel right. Those people that were left suffering, kind of, because, and so I came back and they're
still your colleagues and people you've worked with. So you want to kind of do right by them. But at the same time, then, do you get like a financial package, or is it just like, all right, we're going to stop paying you from today?
Oh no,
like
there was no severance package. It was just today is the last day you will work. This is the last check you will get, and it was over.
I think this is me really showing my workers' rights knowledge, or I guess the differences between some of European kind of workers' rights and American, I guess, because in most European countries, once you have like a permanent contract, it's quite difficult for companies to let you go, and they have to give you quite a lot of notice and quite a lot of like, you know, a substantial package to kind of, unless you choose to obviously move yourself earlier. But yeah, that seems wild to me that you can just say goodbye to your family, kiss your wife goodbye.
Yep.
The day's normal. You go in, and then you're giving her a call like halfway through the day. It's like, oh, I've got some bad news for you. That just seems wild to me. That kind of security can just be pulled out from under you at a moment's notice. It's
definitely a false sense of security.
So how does that actually feel, like coming home and having that conversation with your wife, and then eventually trying to, I guess, come up with a plan or talking to your children about it? How does that actually feel in that moment?
I didn't know what I was going to do. Like that was my first thought, was like, how am I going to tell my wife? Cause I'm the only, you know, she's a stay-at-home mom, and she's a caregiver. Right. She takes care of her mother. And so, I was the only source of income. And, the way unemployment works is you get essentially your take-home pay, but you lose all the benefits. So you don't have health insurance and all those sorts of things. And so, all of that is gone. And, so I was, she was very supportive though. I mean, I didn't know how I was going to tell her, but she was super supportive. And I mean, she always is. She was like, you know, I'm sure it's for the best. We'll figure something out. And she was right. So.
Wow. Yeah, that's fascinating. I just hope that, people that have to go through such a similar thing can kind of find that positivity. Like you mentioned, you had told me that one of your biggest stresses is never quite having enough time to kind of give the best to the different areas of your life. So I'm guessing that is that kind of part of a reflection of during that time of not having a job, you're able to kind of like really focus your time into your wife, your kids, and different aspects. But now as you kind of get back into a job, you kind of having to go through that balancing act. How do you manage that kind of stress? And do you think there are things that men can do to ensure that the different areas of their lives are being nurtured like adequately?
Well, one thing for sure is you can set sort of clear boundaries. And there was an incident where the owner of the company that like I eventually got the job with, he wanted to have a meeting at 1. And so everyone else, you know, they would come in from their lunch break if they had planned to go to lunch at 1 or whatever. And I was like, yeah, I'm not going to be there, man. Like I'll leave at 1. I'm not coming to the meeting. And I said, I can go home and I can get on my computer and I can do it remotely. I said, but I'm not going to be here for the meeting at 1. He made a joke, and I think he was a little irritated, but I mean, he dealt with it, you know, and that was, and he was fine with it. But I was just, or I came in at 9, and it's like I didn't come in earlier. Like this is when I come. This is when I leave. If you're going to need me to be here longer than that for some reason, and I'm going to need a little notice. You know, I'm going to need a week or 2 notice. You're going to put it on a schedule that I can see. And so setting those clear boundaries, and that's not what I did before. Like the previous jobs, I'd work till, they're like, you know, if can you stay a little late? Can you finish this? That would happen a lot. It'd be 5 o'clock. They're like, can you stay and finish this? And it'll be 5:20 before I finish. But I was like, sure, why not? It's an extra 20 minutes. But now, like I said, I'm like, this is when I'm here. This is when I'm leaving. And you know, there were plenty of times even within that schedule, I'd be like, look, I know I'm usually stay to 1, but I got to do something. I'll have to leave at noon today. Or that wouldn't be, you know, I'd leave at noon on Thursday. It would be Monday or whatever. I'd give them notice. But, and most HR, most managers, most whatever, they're accommodating. So I think a lot of times people are just afraid to ask those sorts of things.
That's kind of what I was about to mention, is like, it's one thing kind of saying to yourself, like, right, these are my times, and then like sticking to it when you're in that moment of like my other colleagues are putting in that extra time or whatever, and you think you're going to get left behind. And it's tough. Like I mean, I don't know the graphic design or marketing world, but I used to work in a sales background, and yeah, so that was, you know, so blatantly obvious that you kind of, to push up your numbers and to show your managers that you're really going the extra mile. It's never like written down anywhere, and you're never kind of getting, as a salesperson, you don't tend to get paid overtime because, you know, you can in theory make your money back through your commissions and stuff. But yeah, that kind of unseen pressure of, well, what if? And like, I feel like I have to do it. And like, no one, I don't feel, I mean, there will be some people that want to do it and they don't want to, I guess, have extra time outside work. Maybe they don't have a family or whatever. And that's cool. They want to kind of focus on it. But I did often feel as though, at least when I was working in a position like that, yeah, like you did kind of have to do it just because other people are doing it. Otherwise you might get left behind. So having the confidence to kind of like put your foot down, like, all right, no, this is what I've spoken about. This is what I'm going to do. You're still going to value me equally because you've hired me to do a job, and that's what I'm going to do.
And you also have to accept that you've have different priorities possibly than those people that are willing to stay an extra half hour, an hour, and come in early every once in a while and work through their lunch break. But you've set different priorities, and in some ways that might mean you get paid slightly less or whatever. But you know, I've got those, like I said, I've created those priorities because of that process through COVID. I wouldn't have had those priorities previous to that. And so that's really, it's about creating these boundaries because you have these priorities, and with the understanding it might actually cost you a little bit, but it's worth it.
And
definitely. It's certainly worth it for me.
Yeah. I mean, I think most people would identify as being worth it. I guess there might be seasons of life where you just simply have to prioritize work. If you know, to make ends meet, those finances have to be there. I think we're never trying to judge anyone for like having to choose work over family, if that's something that is necessary. But I am curious, did you notice a difference with them in terms of when you got to spend more time with them? Obviously, I guess with COVID, it was quite a long period of them being at home. But did you ever kind of notice anything about their behaviors and the ways that they acted around you? Or just, you know, did they ever say anything about how they noticed that there was obviously more time with dad?
The thing I've noticed, and I still notice, is they want to do things with me and my wife more than I ever wanted to do things with my parents, even at that age. Obviously, when you get into high school, it's even less want to do stuff with your parents. But I mean, at 10 and 12, you know, I wanted to hang out with my friends, and certainly, like, they will ask me and my wife to hang out and do things with their friends. Like, so my son had a friend over a couple weeks ago, and we all were playing some game they made up together. They were playing a video game in real life, is what you know. And right. Somehow we were the bad guys or whatever in it. And,
of course.
And so it was like my son's friend, and our daughter were against me and my wife. And those aren't things I would ever ask. I'd have been embarrassed to ask my parents those sorts of things. And but yeah, they just expect us to be involved in. You know, in things that they do in a way that I don't think I ever was or ever expected my parents. And, you know, they'll come, hey, you want to watch this TV show? You want to play this video game? You know, take the dog for a walk, you know, all those sorts of things. And, like I said, those aren't things I would have ever I wouldn't have thought my parents wanted to do, so I wouldn't have asked. And I think that's a benefit of us being around and being available and being involved.
Yeah, no, that's really powerful. And I think that's a really nice way to kind of reflect as well. And like kind of have that moment. I think anyone listening can kind of think back to those sorts of things. I think for me, I think my parents would often would try and like bribe me to go on the dog walk with them. Because we had dogs growing up, but like none of the dogs were technically my dogs. They were like technically like the dogs of my brothers and things. So sometimes my parents would end up taking them out and my brother would be away. So they'd try and like, you know, wrangle me to come along, but it would often require a little bit of something for me to come out. So yeah, maybe you get a chocolate bar or whatever it might be to come out on the dog walk, or buy you some sweets at the corner shop. But no, I think that's a nice way to look at it. Like, how did we act towards our parents when we were those ages? So that's really nice.
And that's one of the things I don't, a lot of times parenting ends up being like, I don't know what I want to do, but I don't want to do what my parents did because I don't like that. And I try not to have that attitude. I try to examine it like from like a whole, like all together kind of thing. I don't want to just do the opposite because it's the opposite. Like, and so I just sort of think about it all. And
I think it's important to obviously look at the context of how our parents raised us and kind of what the challenges they might have been facing in different situations. And that, it's not like a complete, I guess, like reflection on like, let's just go the opposite because we don't like that. But that you have to take things into consideration as why these certain decisions were being made. So I'm curious in terms of during that period of COVID and, having this kind of realization of structuring your life, what time along there did the idea of starting this Campfire Gentleman come along? You can obviously tell us a little bit about it as well. But I'm curious about the timeline of how it all kind of lines up.
It didn't really come up then at all. Like, I got like I said, I got the job I described, the hybrid position and worked that up until recently. And then I recently started my own kind of boutique graphic design company. And so that was primarily what I was going to do. And I have these bouts, right? I'm sure lots of people do, where they wake up at some odd time, like 3:00 in the morning, and can't go back to sleep. And so I was having one of these sort of episodes for a week or two. And my computer, which is currently in my office, at that point, it was for some reason, it was in the dining room table, on the dining room table. And so I'm just sort of wandering around in the kitchen at 3:00 in the morning, and I see my computer sitting over there, and I go tap the keyboard and it lights up. And I don't know why, but I'm like, I sit down and pull up a Google Doc and just start writing everything that's on my mind. And so I spend like 15 minutes just sort of stream of consciousness writing all this stuff. And then I sort of look at it afterwards, and one of the phrases on there is, I really like graphic design, but I've been doing it for 20 years at this point, and I want to do something else. I want to do something that helps people. And I just sort of looked at it and I was like, what does that even mean? What can I do to help people? What would that, like I said, what would that mean? And so I just sat there for another 10 or 15 minutes of typing stuff, about what I would do or and so eventually I worked on it. I went to bed, I was excited. I went to bed, woke up next morning really excited, and just sort of typed out some more stuff. Over a couple of days, I worked to what I thought was going to be sort of like a goal setting, planning, like a masterclass type thing. And the more I got into it, it just sort of evolved into this, what do you call it? Like newsletter, right? Like an email newsletter. But I just started distilling everything down to, like, what are my sort of values and pillars and how I operate my life. And I realized as I thought about it, how different it was before and after COVID. And it's like, so what did I discover during COVID? And, I started out, there were like 15 or 20 pillars, and I was like, oh, this is really a part of this, and this is a part of this, and these mean the same thing, just slightly different ways. And so eventually I distilled it down to, like I said, to 5 pillars. But, so yeah, I mean, it was all sort of a distillation of what happened, what I realized during COVID and what I'd been doing since. And so, that's kind of how it developed, just sort of a sleepless night.
Well, some say the best ideas come out of those sorts of moments. So can you tell us about these 5 pillars, and also just what some of the practical things are that you do that would kind of like reflect these pillars? And also, would you say any of them kind of vary in importance, or are they kind of like all like equal importance?
They're kind of, it's kind of like your 4, there's family and purpose, growth, health, and simplicity. And it's almost like the first 4 are like the same level of they're one thing, and then simplicity is almost like the filter that I run them all through. And it's say, am I doing this the most efficient or the simplest way? Am I overcomplicating? I'm overcomplicating health. I'm overcomplicating purpose, and could it be simpler? So like simplicity is almost a filter for the other four. And, but mainly what it's through is kind of the idea of small, repeatable actions instead of like these big, it's not, instead of taking your wife on some big cruise, you just take her out on a date night every week, and you have me and my wife do this thing we learned at a marriage counselor, a marriage retreat, where it's like you have this little 5-minute conversation every day, and it's the same 4 or 5 questions, but it's just that daily repetitive action. Or like I make it a point every day, and I write it down in a planner before at the beginning of the week to text a particular different friend each day. And I try to call my parents every Saturday, and we go visit my mother-in-law every Sunday. And there's just small, repeatable actions. So you're not, a lot of times the idea of, like I said, something like a big vacation or a cruise or whatever it is like the idea of catching up to the stuff that you've missed. And you don't have to catch up if you just sort of do the same, not the same, but daily repeatable actions that are kind of all in the same bucket. And so that's kind of what the idea is built on. It's like, if you want in growth, I make a reading list every year, and it's only 10 books. And, but I read 30 minutes every day. And so, that's more than 10 books, but I'm like, my whole point, if I can get the 10 books read, that's a good year for me. I'm not trying to read, 25 books and write a, whole thing about it. It's just repeatable actions to learn a little bit every day type things. And so that, like I said, that's the bedrock of it, is this idea of small, repeatable daily actions.
Yeah. I've heard some people in the kind of the Christian space call it like a rule of life, and you kind of like end up assigning things in your weekly day. Like I really like the reaching out to people like a different person every day. That's something that I've never necessarily done like specifically like that on a daily basis, but I try to always be way more mindful. Like if I'm thinking of someone who I haven't spoken to for a while, of actually messaging them, and like never thinking as though like I need to this person hasn't replied to me or whatever. Just trying to maintain those relationships in some way. But definitely just once you've kind of logged those things in your calendar and your schedule, whether that be physically in front of you or just mentally, it takes away a lot of that processing time that you have to think, oh, maybe I should do this. Maybe I should do this. Rather, it's all right, 30 minutes, time to read. Now let's pick up the book and sit down and do it. Yep. Or right, time to go and call my mother, or time to visit the mother-in-law, and taking a lot of that decision making away from it. That's what gives you more time, right? That's what gives you more time to be spontaneous with the kids or the wife.
And some days it's just, I try not to make it that way, but some days it's just, a checkbox. Like I sent my friend a text. Yeah. But some days it will lead to a whole conversation. Some days me and my wife just check the box on the 5-minute conversation in the morning. And sometimes that turns into an hour-long discussion over coffee, and so you have to sort of do the same, go through the process, and that will create room for spontaneity, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. No, I think that's a really good message for people to think about. So can you tell our listeners a little bit more about what Campfire Gentlemen, I guess, can offer, and where they can find more about you and the movement?
It's campfiregentleman.com is the website. And it's it's an email newsletter and a blog. So there's several blog posts, and each one is divided up into, the 5 pillars. And so each one has a primary focus of family or health, and then like I send an email newsletter will be on Mondays and Thursdays. The first one actually came out yesterday. Okay. And it'll be essentially, it's one big sort of primary story on Monday, and then a bunch of smaller stories on Thursday. And it's all kind of around the same thing, the daily actions, how sometimes it's discovering like I've I've written it, but it hasn't been published yet, about how I went to a friend of my daughter's birthday party a couple weeks ago. And this place is way out in the country. We get there and we have to go through a gate, and we get through the gate and I realize that my tire is blown. And so the girl's father, who's a man I've never met, comes out and helps me, works on the tire. We realize it can't get changed or it won't work. And so I had to buy a whole new tire. And so he takes me to Walmart to buy a whole new tire. And this is all why during his daughter's birthday, he takes the time out of that, spend an hour taking me to Walmart. And so I just sort of, like, the articles were reflecting on sort of character and how, like, a character can be, it's almost like an anti-social media position on a lot of my stuff, where it's like, character doesn't have to be this thing you post on social media. And, it's this quiet thing you do when no one pays attention. And so so there's some reflections like that are, that fit in those sorts of categories. And so that's what I'm highlighting, or things that sort of happen, things overarching, and then things sort of in my daily life where these pillars show up and how they show up. And so it's some actionable things, some reflections, some things I've just some quotes every once in a while and how those might relate, and books I read and a podcast I catch that really made a difference, things like that.
I really like the sharing about that story with the other father, because one of the things I've often tried to reflect on and talk about is, in this kind of digital age where, like, in theory, like, there are billions of people at our fingertips, right? Like, in theory, they're all there, like, accessible through whatever social media platform you want to think about. So in a world where, like, so many people are shouting into a void of trying to reach hundreds, thousands, millions, whatever it might be, how can we kind of spend the time to really focus on the people that are around us? Like, and that's not just, like, physically near us, like, that's people like you reaching out to me and coming on this podcast and, like, actually spending the time to talk about things that are a little bit more real life. And I think we can learn so much from that kind of more authentic and real processing, as opposed to trying to reach thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands, and actually kind of take the value out of the people that are actually kind of responding to you, rather than the likes or whatever it might be. So that's often been my kind of soapbox in the social media point of view.
Well, then what I realized was there was almost, like, there was an absence of relatable material to someone like me who making money isn't, like, the first thing on their to-do list. And so there's a whole lot of, like, hustle talk and, there's a whole, and it's sort of, intertwines with, weightlifting and all, and all the fast cars, all the kind of stuff. It's sort of, there's a whole lot of content for those people. And I feel like that's not actually most people. And half the time it's not the people selling it online either. And so I just feel like people like you and me, there's not actually a lot of content, but there's actually a lot of people like us.
Yeah, it's just a case of kind of searching it out, finding it, trying to put something out there. So yeah, I really appreciate hearing it. Do you want to add something?
No, I was to say that's the people that I'm people like me is who I'm essentially writing to myself about myself, if nothing else, and seeing if there's other people like me out there, which I knew there was. It's just a matter of them, if I can get to them and, and this resonate with them. And because, sometimes you just feel like if you look out in the social media landscape, you're like, there's no one like me out here. And a lot of times it's just because they're too busy to be out there on social media doing those things. And so, I'm like,
working the
I'm
algorithms
out here doing those things now. Yeah.
Yeah. Posting 10 times a day and doing all that. Yeah, exactly. Well, I'll put all the links obviously in the description for people to check out the website and check out the various social media handles. But as we come to the end of our time together, I like to ask every guest the same questions. So if you were to think back, I guess about 12 years or so before you became a dad for the very first time, what do you think the Clay back then needed to hear, or what piece of advice do you think you'd give him before welcoming his son into the world?
The biggest thing, I think, and I realize it more and more every year, is that not only is it okay to not know what you're doing, but your parents didn't know what they were doing either.
Yes.
Like your parents didn't have it all figured out, and you're not going to have it all figured out, and everyone's going to know, but no one's going to say anything, and it's okay. Like you're learning as you go, and you'll forever be learning as you go. I have to imagine when I'm, 70 and my kids are 60 and 58 or whatever it is, like I still won't know what I'm doing. And so that's going to be okay.
Yeah.
Because that was always the impression I had, was that not only my parents, but everyone else's parents knew exactly what they were doing. But they did.
Yeah. I would often look at, like, when I was first having my first kid, I was looking at the parents that maybe you had the 10, 8 and 6-year-old, like they had the perfect family, and then they invite you around for the dinner with the craziness and everything going wild and the screaming and the shouting. It's like, oh yes, you've got your newborn now. This is what life is actually like. It's like, oh, okay, fantastic.
So you realize everyone's just treading water.
Exactly. Well, Clay, I really appreciate the time. Thanks so much for coming on and sharing all about your parenting journey and things on the Dad Dialogue podcast.
I appreciate you having me.
And there we have another Dad Dialogue conversation. Of course, a massive thank you guys out to Clay for coming on the show and sharing his stories with us. I really did enjoy talking to Clay, and one of the things that really stood out to me was him mentioning the trying to reach out to a friend at least once a day. And that really did just remind me of how pertinent that sort of thing is. The intentionality of friendship and trying to maintain good relationships is so important to be a family person as well, to kind of model that to our kids as well. So that was a really nice thing to hear. I really just enjoy hearing how his approach to life has kind of altered and changed following that process of losing his job, and just appreciating that maybe work isn't everything, and how we approach life is super important. So yeah, really, really interesting conversation. If you'd like to learn more about Clay and Campfire Gentlemen, I'm going to leave all the links in the description, so you can go over to his website, sign up for his newsletter, and find them also on Instagram. So yeah, big thank you to Clay for coming on the show. Reminder, you can go over to daddialogue.co.uk if you'd like to be a guest yourself, or just get in touch with me for any other reason. Thank you so much for listening today, and I hope to talk to you again soon. Goodbye.